Hello and welcome to Mental Health Hour. I am Dr. Tapo. I hope you've had a wonderful beginning of the week. Yes, the month of January 2024 is pretty much done. So we're progressing pretty fast and hopefully pretty well into 2024. Before we go any further, a disclaimer that Mental Health Hour is for educational and information purposes only. I do not replace a licensed and qualified mental health practitioner within your region, within your jurisdiction, within your city, town, whatever it is. I am just providing information and education so you can make some well-informed decisions about your health. Please do get in touch with your questions, your comments, share some of your experiences so we can all learn from each other. To get in touch, you can text 437-778-3299 or email infolovebay@gmail.com, infolovebay@gmail.com, or text 437-778-3299. Last week, we started talking about what exactly do we mean by mental health? What is mental health? And the week before, we were just kind of looking at some of the questions and comments that came in. I asked people to also send in topics that they would like discussed and explored during the mental health hour. Thanks to those that sent their texts and their emails and messages sharing topics that they would like covered. And I wrote them down, and over the next, I'll say 6 to 8 weeks, we'll be really delving deep into these topics. Starting last week with what do we mean by mental health? It's something we hear all the time. It's something we like to talk about. We like to use sometimes as an excuse for not going to work or not getting involved in certain things. Oh, my mental health. But what do we mean by mental health? And how do we take inventory? How do we evaluate and take inventory of the status of our mental health? Where are we from a mental health perspective? How do we as individuals check in on ourselves to see how is my mental health, right? So we started talking about that last week. We'll continue talking about it this week. And as we continue talking about it, we'll talk about personal growth, what that is, what that looks like, how we can make that happen, and how it is a factor in our mental health. We'll talk about self-esteem, self-love, self-worth, self-judgment as well. Self-harm is something we will also cover. We'll talk about nurturing relationships, boundaries, social entanglements, maybe. We'll talk about trauma towards the end of 2023. As we're approaching the holidays, we really delve deep into triggers because a lot of people are triggered over the holidays, and we talked about trauma when we're talking about that. And somebody sent in a message and said, can you talk about trauma in the workplace? Trauma that you get from being in a toxic work environment and all of that. So we will get on that. And of course, as always, we'll talk about stigma. We can't talk about mental health without talking about stigma, because one of the biggest challenges and barriers to accessing health care is stigma around mental health. So these are some of the topics we'll be diving into over the next few weeks. Please, like I said, send your questions, your comments, your stories, even if you have a lesson that you learned and you want to share with other people. 437-778-3299, or email infolovebay@gmail.com. Thanks. I'll just take a little moment to say thank you to the Love Bay Radio family. There's a lot of hard work that goes into creating and maintaining this platform, bringing us this resource, bringing us this opportunity, even on a simply social level, something to do in our evenings, on our weekends. Thanks to the Love Bay Radio family for that. Okay, so let's get into some of the questions and comments that came in over the past week, so that we're not kind of jumping back and forth on some of these topics. Some questions I will simply read, but I won't get into answering them. And I'm reading them so you know that if it's you that sent it in, we got your message, and we'll definitely cover whatever question or topic you've suggested. It just might not be today, so that we're not going back and forth. Okay. So we'll start in, let's start here in North America. So we have a message from Etobicoke. Etobicoke is one of the, I'll say, cities, I guess. Yeah, it's a city in the Greater Toronto area here in Ontario. And this person wrote an unhealthy relationship with an emotionally traumatized or wounded man. So this person is referring to a question I read out last week, where a woman wrote in saying she loved a man back to health, but now she's experiencing problems with this man's ex-wife and their children. And we were talking about what exactly does a relationship, or how exactly does a healthy relationship come out of a nursing situation where one party is traumatized. And really, when you're traumatized and it's relationship trauma, chances are you're not quite ready to be in a healthy relationship. And this woman had talked about she nursed her man from his traumatized self into love. And those were her words: I nursed him into love, or I nurtured him into love. And my question to her was, how are you? How is your mental health after doing that hard work of nurturing a traumatized person back into love? And can you have a healthy relationship that was built on one person being wounded and injured and traumatized and needing care, and you being the caregiver? And really, as a therapist, so for example, as a therapist, we have regulations and protections for our clients over situations like that. So for me as a therapist, and let's say a wounded man, relationally wounded, has had trauma, and they're my client and my patient, and I nurse them and nurture them back to love, that love cannot be for me, because my role was to nurse and nurture. So that love can't be for me. There are regulations, there are protections for that person, because they are vulnerable. Because they are vulnerable. How can a person who is wounded and traumatized be in a healthy relationship? So somebody from Etobicoke was listening to this, and I guess that question about having a healthy relationship with a traumatized, wounded man, if that is possible. So this listener says, this has been my life for the last 6 years. So this listener in Etobicoke has been in an unhealthy relationship with an emotionally traumatized and wounded man. And she is saying, I feel as though I am on a merry-go-round and can't figure out why I date these kinds of men. My relationships always seem to end on a sour note. Why me? So that's her question. Why me? And I listen, Etobicoke listener, you've pretty much answered your question yourself. You keep going on this merry-go-round with these kinds of men. And I'm assuming by kinds of men, you're talking about emotionally traumatized, wounded men. And what you're saying is you go from one wounded man to the other, and you're asking, why me? But you know why, because you keep going from the same type of man to the next. It's become a pattern in your life, and you know it. You know it. Like, why you? What you need to be asking is, how do you stop? How do you break those unhealthy patterns? Because this isn't even about the men, it's you. This is you. You are engaged in a very unhealthy and probably toxic pattern of looking for men that are emotionally traumatized and wounded. And the thing about men who are emotionally traumatized and wounded, just like women who are emotionally traumatized and wounded, is that they're vulnerable. And the reason most people go after those types of people is that vulnerability. You see an opportunity to control, you see an opportunity to even bombard them with love and affection. It fulfills something in you. And it's not out of good motives. I'm going to say that, and this might be an unconscious thing, but your motives are not good. Because if your motives were good, you would not be trying to have relationships that are sexual, that are intimate, that are deep, that are long lasting with people that are not in the position to do that in a healthy way. They are traumatized, they are wounded, they are vulnerable, which means they are often preyed upon by people who see it as an opportunity to control them. So your love, I question if it is love in the first place. So it keeps ending on a sour note because it is toxic in the first place. Two people cannot have a healthy relationship when one of them is traumatized and wounded. That person needs to heal, needs to do the work so that they can turn up in any relationship mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, all of that healthy. Then they can have a healthy relationship. It's like trying to make a fruit salad with rotten fruit. Your lettuce may be fresh, but everything else is spoiled. So really, who's going to eat that salad? It's the same thing. You might think you're healthy, but if your partner is emotionally traumatized and wounded, your relationship is not healthy. And you are taking on probably more than you should, which can bring up resentment, or you're getting into that because you're an opportunist looking for an opportunity to control and to have things your way. And then when those things don't go your way, you become sour, you become bitter, you become resentful, you become, oh, I'm hurt. After all that I did for them, he was broken and I was there for him. He was depressed and I was there for him. I did, but really, if he was broken and depressed, you had no business trying to be in a loving, healthy relationship with that person. Let them heal first. If you can be for them in a strictly platonic way, where you're offering your support, your friendship, all of that, with absolutely no strings attached, absolutely no emotional blackmail, no emotional expectations. You're being there for them because they need a friend, they need a shoulder, and that's it. Anything beyond that, nope, not healthy, will end badly, or it will just end up traumatizing you. You might come into it thinking I'm healthy, but trust me, because that person hasn't healed, they're still dealing with a lot. You might end up traumatized yourself. So, Etobicoke listener, change your pattern of behavior. And I would say, I would strongly, strongly suggest that you get therapy before you jump into another situationship with anyone. You need help. Go and get the help that you need. And from there, if he's traumatized and wounded, leave it alone. Let him heal. And then he can come into whatever relationship in a healthy way. Okay? All right, so let's move on. Upstate New York. We have a Samantha in upstate New York who says, "Hi, Dr. Tapo. In this era we live in, you commented about financial situations playing a part in our mental health. Can you elaborate more on the specifics?" Definitely, Samantha, I will do that. We have Khadija in the UK who says, "During our lunch break, a colleague of mine said something that I am bringing to the mental health hour to discuss." So, Khadijah's colleague said, not feeling good about yourself is a mental health issue. And the need to be accepted can turn into a mental health issue. So Khadijah's colleague at work there said these two really important statements. One, not feeling good about yourself is a mental health issue. And two, the need to be accepted can turn into a mental health issue. Okay. And Khadijah says, this colleague of hers is always the life of the party, and I find her comments very troubling. So Khadija, I'm not clear why you are troubled by these two statements, which are in fact accurate. I don't know what your colleagues being the life of the party has to do with anything. I think I'm misunderstanding something or missing something. So, Khadija, if you're listening, please write back and elaborate a little more. I'm sensing some tension maybe with your colleague. Was this colleague saying that to you directly, or was this just a general conversation? It seems to have hit home for you. Your colleague is absolutely correct. Not feeling good about yourself is a mental health issue. When we talk about self love, self esteem, self worth, even self care, all of those factors, self judgment, then going into even self harm, suicidal ideation, all of that springs from not feeling good about yourself. And the longer you don't feel good about yourself, the worse your mental health becomes until you get to a situation where suicidal ideation might happen. Okay? So your colleague is correct. The second thing your colleague said is the need to be accepted can turn into a mental health issue. Also, absolutely correct. This need to be accepted can lead to people pleasing. It can lead to abuse. It can lead to, again, self esteem, self harm type behaviors. So often, when we strive, work hard, jump through hoops, bend over backwards for acceptance, we've already crossed a line. In a healthy relationship, and it doesn't matter if we're talking friends, we're talking colleagues, we're talking significant others, all of that, acceptance is one of those things that should be freely given and easily accepted. When you find tensions around someone accepting you, or you accepting that somebody accepts you, When there's tensions around that, those are red flags. Something's wrong in that relationship. And what do we mean by acceptance? We will talk about that some more when we delve deeper into relationships. Like I said, I don't want to be jumping back and forth. But Khadija, long story short, your colleague is correct. Those statements are accurate. And if you're finding yourself in the position where you're not feeling good about yourself and you have this need to be accepted and you're engaging in unhealthy behaviors, you are crossing boundaries, losing your dignity, being abused and disrespected, also you can be accepted, seek help, go for therapy before things get to a place where you will really, really get hurt. Okay. And then to my favorite, one of my favorite places on earth, Nigeria, from Imo State. We have Uche from Imo State in Nigeria who says, I listened to you last week about spiritual needs and emotional regulation. How can you find ways to achieve the aforementioned? Okay. So last week, when we started talking about what is mental health, one of the things I brought up was how our spiritual needs factor into our mental health. And when we talk about spiritual needs, we can look at it from a religious perspective. We can look at it from even a philosophical perspective, your values, your beliefs, your that inner person, inner soul type space, and how we look after that, and how we commune even with others in a spiritual sense. So, for example, I would give myself as an example. I am a Christian, so when I think of my spiritual being, it is very much tied into my Christian beliefs, and it is something that I share with my family and my friends. For example, we pray together, we go to church together. When things are difficult and hard, we encourage each other spiritually through our values and our beliefs. That's me, using myself as an example. You might not be a Christian, you might not be a religious person, but there is still some way that you should look after your spiritual being, that inner part of you, your soul, so to speak, because it's not all about our minds, it's not all about our physical bodies, it's not all about our emotions and our finances. It's also about that inner being, that essence of us. And often when people come to therapy and talk about, I'm not happy, or I don't have a purpose in life, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, I have no purpose, I feel like I don't have a calling, why am I on earth? Often when people are talking about this, what they're talking about is at a very spiritual level. So you don't even have to believe in God or be religious to be a spiritual person and to look after your spiritual person. There's that inner deep part of you that hungers for even deep connections in our relationships, meaning in life, purpose in life, fulfillment in our work. Those are our spirits calling out to us. And we need to have some way to feed them, to nurture them, to protect them. So even boundaries around that are important. So we'll get into that as we continue with these topics over the weeks. Emotional regulation, to give a brief definition, is simply how you manage your emotions. Someone says something to you, you get angry. Emotional regulation is being able to regulate, to control that anger so it doesn't get the better of you. Emotional regulation is simply resisting being driven by your emotions. So you don't let your emotions drive you, drive your relationships, that's emotional regulation. Even when you're like really angry, you know how to express that anger in an assertive, healthy, regulated way. It doesn't get the better of you. Okay. So as we continue with the mental health hour, we will discuss all of these things in a lot more detail. And again, write to us, email us 437-778-3299, or email infolovebay@gmail.com if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have something to share. And once more, a reminder that Mental Health Hour is for educational and information purposes only. Please get the help that you need from a qualified professional near you. Okay? So, from where we left off last week, what is mental health? I spoke about financial aspects of it. Um, uh, yeah, okay. Spoke about, I was just checking. I think I did read Samantha from upstate New York. You asked about financial situations playing a part in our mental health. And can you elaborate more on the specifics? Okay, yes, I did read that. Okay, so I spoke about our physical health and how that is a factor in our mental health. I spoke about our social health, which is our friendships, our relationships, our going through society and how that pans out for us, how we experience other people and people experience us. So that's the social. I spoke about spiritual, which I just did again briefly. Then there's the economical, which is your financial side, your economic security, job security, being able to afford a roof over your head, food on the table, pay your bills, and all of that. And then what's the fifth one? There's a fifth one. So we have, and then emotional, yes, emotional health. And sometimes people confuse the emotional with the mental, and kind of interchange those. They are very closely linked, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Often our mental health is impacted by an inability to regulate our emotions. I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a short temper. Having a short temper doesn't mean I have a mental health problem. So I have a short temper. And every time I lose my temper, I get into fights, I get into arguments, I get into like all sorts, and my relationships start breaking down. And then maybe because of my temper, I often end up ruminating negative thoughts. So this is where the emotional, the inability to regulate my emotions is now starting to impact my mental health. But having a short temper doesn't necessarily mean you have a mental health issue. But if you don't learn how to control that temper, how to manage that temper, it can lead to situations that then impact your mental health. So, emotional and mental are not necessarily the same thing, but they're definitely interconnected. You cannot divorce one from the other, right? When you have a mental health problem, it can stress your emotions because maybe, I'll give an example. Let's say you have a psychotic break. So, psychosis is a symptom of different types of mental disorders. So, it's not a disorder in itself, not necessarily, but it's a symptom of different types of mental health disorders. So, let's say you have an episode, a psychotic break, and maybe you recover from that. But because of that, you are now in an emotionally vulnerable state, which means maybe before, if something happened, maybe your friend, spouse, sibling, or whatever could say something to you and you could take it in stride, and you had a lot more capacity for things. But because of this psychotic episode that you had and the challenges of that, you're now in a place where you've lost some of that control, some of that emotional regulation. You are, maybe overwhelmed by what happened. So you can't really separate your emotional from your mental, but they are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. Okay. So your emotional, your social, your spiritual, your financial, and your physical. That's where we started last week. Today, I'm going to go a little deeper into the things that impact our mental health, right? So we start off like with that general five, right? Now we're going to go a little deeper into different areas under those general five. Okay, so let's start with social. So social, like I said, is the way you experience other people and other people experience you. It's in your home, it's in your work, your school, it's out there, it's at the bus stop, it's at the grocery store. That all comes into the social. And one of the things that we know and research has shown is that people who experience social discrimination, so racism, homophobia, all those things, Islamophobia, whatever type of social discrimination, those people are at a higher risk for mental health illness or disorders. Why? Because they're navigating through some difficult social challenges, barriers, discrimination, violence, even if your life is threatened because of the color of your skin or your beliefs or your orientation or whatever it is, you're also vulnerable to violence, right? So those social discriminations can lead to mental health illness or mental health disorder. We know, for example, research has shown that people of color, Black people, non white people generally, have high rates of depression and anxiety due to racial discrimination. So, this is how the social can lead to mental health challenges. How you're experiencing the world because of your race, because of your gender, because of your orientation, even because of your accent or your language. If it's in Africa, we're talking tribalism. I don't know if there's an African country that doesn't have tribalism. In the worst of them, they're killing each other. And then in the ones that are just a little more, I don't know what word to use, there's a lot of tribal, even discrimination. All of these things can lead to mental health issues because of how you are experiencing the world, because of the barriers that are placed on you, because of the violence you're subjected to, because of the limitations, the discrimination, the oppression, things being taken away from you, being excluded. All of these things can impact your mental health. So when we talk about social, it's not just our intimate relationships like with our spouses or with our best friends and our siblings or parents or children or family. It's the whole social world. And that can also include some of the things we watch on TV. That's part of our social life. I remember during the pandemic, one of the things that really impacted people's mental health was the news. For me personally, it was around the murder of George Floyd. My mental health really suffered. And I came to a point where I stopped watching TV. I stopped looking at anything on social media that had anything to do with that, to protect my mental health, because Even watching how he died was traumatizing for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people. And that's part of our social. So when we talk about social, it's also what we consume as entertainment, as consumers, right? Our TV, our social media. And we know research has shown how much damage social media has done to people's relationships, but people's self-esteem, self-worth, constantly comparing yourself to so and so, thinking that now my ideal body, I should be looking like, I don't know, Kim Kardashian and the Cardi B's and all of them. And you're lying awake at night thinking, how do I raise the $25,000 to go to Brazil and get a new behind? That's stressful. There are actually people having sleepless nights because they're trying to think, how do I raise money to augment my chest or my bum or my hips? That is part of the social. What becomes all consuming to our minds, we're becoming stressed because our lives don't look as glamorous, our butts don't look as big, our muscles don't look as buff, and all of this. And we're comparing ourselves, and we're becoming less and less because we're seeing more and more of what other people are. And this can lead to self-harm, suicidal ideation, chronic stress, depression, anxiety, so many mental health challenges because of what we're consuming on TV and social media. So when we talk about social factors impacting our mental health, it goes beyond just who do I live with at home. It's also our relationships at work. It's also our relationship with social media and television and even music. Some of the music we listen to is not good for our mental health. You're constantly listening to music that demeans women's bodies, that exhorts violence and aggressive behaviors, that puts you in a mindset of that is just not peaceful or calm or self-preserving. And you're constantly consuming these types of lyrics and music, and what it does is it impacts your mental health because you're not giving your brain, your mind, your even spirit that space that is wholesome, that is self-affirming, that is affirming, that is healthy. So it's not just our relationships, but it's what we're consuming as well as social beings. Some of us were so isolated during the pandemic. We spent so much time on our devices. We now find it difficult. And not just even during the pandemic, just generally. The amount of time you spend on your devices and social media, is it healthy? Is it healthy? And there are all these apps and that will tell you that yesterday, out of 24 hours, you spent 16 hours on Instagram. You spent 4 hours on TikTok. So while you're on Instagram and TikTok, you're definitely not socializing with other people, which affects your mental health. You're not exercising, which affects your mental health. You're consuming things that are not affirming to you and who you are and your situation in life. What is the point of watching these millionaires and billionaires for hours at a time? You yourself can barely make your rent. You're going to feel really, really crappy and horrible about your own life because you're spending it consuming things that are beyond you. You're not a millionaire, you're not a billionaire, but you're spending 5, 6 hours consuming the lifestyles of the rich and famous. You're neither rich nor famous, you're struggling. that impacts your mental health. So we really have to think deeply about our social consumption as much as we have to think deeply about our social relationships, because our social consumption impacts our mental health. It even impacts our decision making. Everybody has this certain bag or car or whatever. You barely can afford it, but because that's what you're filling your head with, you're now spending beyond your means so you can keep up. So you can also have something to show on social media. You're trying to keep up, but you can't afford to. So you buy that one really expensive item, you take your Instagram, everybody now knows that, oh yeah, Johnny has a, I don't know, Rolex or whatever it is. But Johnny's lying awake at night thinking, how on earth am I going to pay the rent? Maybe because you're spending so much, you're not buying healthy food. You're not buying healthy food. And so your physical health is now being impacted by unhealthy spending habits, all of this. And as you can see, the financial, the economical is tied to our physical, it's tied to our spiritual, it's tied to our social. The five factors also cannot be separated from each other. And one thing can lead to the next and impact the next, which all impacts our mental health. So let's think about what we're consuming as social beings. How are we socializing? How are we experiencing the world? And how is the world experiencing us? And when I say how is the world experiencing us, some of us don't know how to socialize in healthy ways. You don't know how to make friends. Maybe you keep getting into fights and conflicts and tensions with people. So because people now know that, oh, don't talk to that one, she's not this or she's not that, they start withdrawing from you. So that's how others are experiencing you, and they will respond to what they're experiencing from you. I was reading the other day something about how to be more attractive to people. One of the things was smile, just smile. You don't have to be the best looking person, you don't have to be, but the fact that you smile at people makes you more attractive. The other thing, compliment people. Compliment people. And by compliment, what I mean is you're not saying, oh, your shoes look nice. How much did they cost? Or your shoes look nice. Are they Prada? That's not a compliment. That's you being nosy about other people's finances and spending habits. A compliment is your shoes are pretty. Leave it at that. You look lovely today. Leave it at that. And complimenting people makes you more attractive, because what you're doing is acknowledging and affirming other people, and that always makes people feel good. And when you make someone feel good, they are naturally attracted to you. And I'm not talking attraction at a sexual or whatever level. What I mean is being the kind of person that people like to be around, that people like to socialize with, that people like to talk with. That when you walk into the room, people are like, oh, yay, there's Andy. Because Andy smiles, Andy compliments, Andy has good social manners. So people like being around you. And because people like being around you, you feel good yourself. That sometimes you're the kind of person, as soon as you walk in, everyone is walking out. Oh, I have to go do this, I have to go do that, oh, I'm busy. And the room clears out very, very quickly. And then you're sitting there thinking like, these people are horrible, they're mean, they're this, they're that. But maybe it's how they have experienced you. So as much as we want people to be nice and kind and all that, we also have to be nice and kind and all that. because what we sow into our social lives is what we reap. Sometimes we go through certain things and it changes who we are. You become that person. I remember some time ago, I was going through so many challenges, so many challenges. And someone pointed out to me, you don't smile anymore. And the funny thing is, that whole week, I had been contemplating the fact that I wasn't smiling anymore because I had noticed it in myself. And now this person who's close to me, loves me, also said it. And even though I had been thinking about it, having someone else say to me really helped me, because they, first of all, affirmed what I had been thinking. But secondly, it also showed there was somebody who cared enough to observe this about me and say something and offer something to support me. Our social lives are important because we need other people. So even when you've been hurt in the past, do that work to heal, and don't change your character to become someone who's got all these walls and barriers up. Nobody can get close to you. You don't trust people anymore. All of this. If you don't work on healing from social disappointments, rejections, all of that, it makes our relationships difficult, which takes away the quality of our relationships, which impacts our mental health. So, as social beings, we're watching what we're consuming, we're analyzing how we are experiencing the world, but the world is also experiencing us. And we're making the necessary adjustments, taking the time to seek help, to make those changes that make us healthy enough to be in healthy relationships with other people. Doing the work that enables us to smile genuinely at other people. Doing the work that enables us to have boundaries, healthy boundaries in our relationships. Doing the work that enables us to be friends to our friends. And I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. If you don't have friends, the best way to make friends is by being a friend yourself. If you are lonely and isolated, the best way is to reach out to people. That is our social life. We are responsible for it. Yes, other people can come into our lives and blow them up and do whatever. And if that happens to you, get the help you need, do the work to heal, and still smile and be kind and compassionate and outgoing and be a friend. Do not let the rejections and heartbreaks and disappointments of past relationships prevent you from having healthy ones now and in the future. You need that for your mental health. We will talk some more about relationships as we progress over the next few weeks. But I really wanted us to understand the social aspect, those social factors that can impact our mental health. And how our social problems, what I'm thinking about here, okay, so I had a client some time ago, young woman, very passionate, and overly invested in social justice. And what that means was she was taking on so much, really building high expectations for herself and society generally, working, for social justice, to the point that she got burned out, first of all, because when you are a social justice warrior or whatever you want to call yourself, and you're doing all this work, you have to be mindful that change, especially social change, takes time. And for this young woman, because things were not moving as fast as she wanted them to, she started becoming quite depressed about social situations in the world. So, this is an example of how her experience of the world is impacting her mental health, because she's doing all this work to fight racism, fight racism. She's doing everything she can, more than she should. She got to a place where, because things are not changing fast enough, because, and sometimes people outright reject your social justice. They like it the way it is because they're benefiting from it. And so when she encountered these types of things, it hit her hard mentally, really, really hard mentally, until she got to a place where she stopped going to her classes at university because she was depressed about the state of the world. She just became really bitter about life generally, and hopeless. And then it starts coming into that self-harm, suicidal area, where she's talking about life isn't worth it. What's the point? I don't see the point of living. If the world is like this, it's a horrible place. And so what was happening in the outside world, and she was from a loving, supportive family, so there were no family issues here, but it was just, first of all, her consumption, always on social media, looking this up, looking, so everything was coming in and she was just taking it all in, and then trying to do things about it in a system that moves glacially, like really, really slowly. And she was getting burnt out. She was getting disappointed, rejected, feeling hopeless, and started to talk about suicide and self-harm. So again, our social consumption, our social relationships, the way we experience the world, it's really important. And one thing I've said before is, if you cannot control it, if it's beyond your control, let it go. Because the more you try and the more you hold on to something and you can't control it, you're fighting a losing battle. And the only person getting wounded in this battle is you, because you're trying to control things that you absolutely cannot. You cannot control other people's racism, for example. The law can protect you and people can hide it because they don't want to get in trouble with the law. But if a person is racist, they're racist, and there's nothing you can do about it, save for engage the law. But the law cannot change a person's attitude. It can change their behavior, but it won't change their attitude. So do you then keep trying with no? You leave it alone, you step away, you go deal with something that you can actually control, which is your attitude. You can't control what people say and do in your relationships and all of that, but you can control what you say and do. And the more you learn how to do that, and part of that is that emotional regulation, the more you learn how to control your own emotions, regulate your own emotions, um, determine your attitude, control your attitude, regulate your attitude and your responses to things. You are the one thing you can control and regulate, not other people, not your spouse, not your children, not your parents, not your colleagues, not your subordinates at work. You can control yourself. And that's really important when it comes to social interactions, social consumption, and the way you experience the world, all of which can impact your mental health. So if you're somebody who has found your social life is really challenging, really difficult, I would suggest you seek help. Sometimes we have personality disorders, and some time ago I went through a number of them, like borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. These are just a few. There are quite a number of them. People with personality disorders find relationships very, very, very challenging. So if you've noticed a pattern in your life where you're constantly having relationship issues, and I'm not just talking like with your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, or partner or whatever. I'm talking you fight with your siblings, you fight with your parents, you fight with your colleagues, you fight with your partner. Everywhere you go, the closer you get to a person, the more you fight, the more issues there are. You might have a personality disorder, you might. And the way you can find out is go and get help. Go and see your physician. Tell them, I think I might have this. I have so many relationship problems. I can't seem to get along with people. People don't seem to like me. Like, you'd never think this is something to go to the doctor, but it actually is, because that's how important your relationships and social life are. Go to your doctor, especially if you're always in fights, you're always stressed about your relationships. Go to your doctor, explain to them, I have so many and ongoing relationship issues. I need to speak to someone. They could refer you to a psychiatrist who can do a proper assessment. And if you have a personality disorder, they can let you know what it is and you can get the help you need. The thing about personality disorders is you can learn how to do things differently. You actually can learn how to do things differently. But that learning starts with awareness. Oh, I have borderline personality disorder. That means I'm likely to have relationship difficulties. Start to work with a therapist. They help you identify places and ways that you can start working on your own behavior. I knew a woman once who got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She was married. And then she started using that as an excuse to be a really horrible wife to her husband. Well, it's my borderline personality disorder. I can't help it. You actually can. You actually can. And just because you've been diagnosed with a personality disorder does not mean people should accept and tolerate bad behaviors. No. So she would do like horrible, awful things and say it's because I have borderline personality disorder. I can't help it. That man left her because up until they knew what was causing these issues, he had been there, he was supportive. Then she finds out she has borderline personality disorder, which she can actually work on, learn new behaviors, new coping mechanisms, new ways of relating to her husband in a nice, healthy way. She was using it as an excuse, so he left because she wasn't willing to do the work. And not only that, her bad behavior, she now had an excuse, and so she was just doing whatever. So having a personality disorder does not excuse being a bad friend, wife, daughter, son, whatever in relationships. What it does mean is you have some work to do, and it is absolutely possible to learn new ways, new behaviors that are healthier for your relationships. So, in a nutshell, our social lives are very, very important factors in our mental health. Our relationships, our social consumption, of TV, of the internet and social media, of anything really, even the things that we buy. And when we're talking about social consumption, we can also start talking about substance use. That can come in there as well. How we drink, how often we drink, who we're drinking with. We can talk about porn, which impacts a lot of relationships. That is social consumption. You're having challenges having a healthy sexual relationship due to an addiction to sex or porn. That is part of our social factors as well. So when we talk about social consumption, it's all of these things that we take in from different places in different ways and different formats that impact our social lives, which in turn impact our mental health. So I'm going to leave it there for this week. Thank you for joining me here on the Mental Health Hour. Again, always send your questions, your comments, share your experiences to 437-778-3299 or email infolovebay@gmail.com. Thank you to the Love Bay family, Love Bay Radio. See you next week. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Wonderful last day of January tomorrow. And take care of each other. Be compassionate, be kind. Be compassionate and kind to each other. Good night.